18th place, 1 lap down, and the fastest lap of the race. On the 22nd of September 2024, under the floodlights of Singapore, a 35-year-old Australian was called into the pits for a set of tires he did not need. In a race he could no longer score in. He went back out and drove the fastest lap of the night. It was the last lap of his Formula One career, and he suspected it. The crowd did not know. His own team would not say. 4 days later, a press release confirmed what the tears in the television pen had already announced. No farewell season, no final home Grand Prix. A paragraph on a Thursday. This was a man with 8 Grand Prix wins, 32 podiums, and 257 starts across 14 seasons. A man who once beat a 4-time world champion in identical machinery and who was called the best overtaker in the sport by the people who employed him. He left Formula One loved by almost everyone in it and wanted, in the end, by no one. So what really happened to Daniel Ricciardo? That is exactly what we are here to find out. Start with where he came from because it explains the nerve. Daniel Ricciardo was born on the 1st of July 1989 in Perth, Western Australia, one of the most isolated major cities on Earth, an ocean and a hemisphere away from Formula One's European heartland. A boy from Perth does not drift into Grand Prix racing. He has to cross the planet for it, and he has to be undeniable when he arrives. Ricciardo came up through the Red Bull Junior program, and when Formula One finally opened its door, in July of 2011 at Silverstone, the door led to the very back of the grid. His first team was HHRT, the slowest car in the championship, a machine that existed to be lapped. Most careers that begin at the back of the grid end there, quietly. He drove it anyway, and the people paid to notice such things noticed where he was braking. 2 seasons at Toro Rosso followed, Red Bull's finishing school, where the results were modest and the braking points were not. And then there was the smile, the permanent sunlit grin that made him the easiest driver in the paddock to like, and the easiest to underestimate. It looked like softness, it was not. Rivals kept making that mistake, one braking zone at a time. For 2014, Red Bull promoted him into the seat beside Sebastian Vettel, the reigning 4-time world champion, the most successful driver of his generation. The paddock assumed the cheerful Australian was there to carry the spare parts. 9 months later, that assumption was dead. The numbers from that season still read like a misprint. 238 points for Ricciardo, 167 for Vettel. Read that again. In 12 seasons of Formula One, Sebastian Vettel was beaten by a teammate across a full championship exactly once, and it was by Daniel Ricciardo in 2014. And it was not close. Not 1, not 2, 3 Grand Prix victories that year in Canada, in Hungary, in Belgium, in a season Mercedes owned so completely that he was the only other driver on Earth to win a Grand Prix. Vettel won none. Ricciardo finished 3rd in the World Championship, and 2 years later he finished 3rd again, twice in the top 3 of the sport, in an era when Mercedes had turned it into a private procession. The weapon behind those numbers was braking. Ricciardo stopped a Formula One car later than anyone else dared, later than instinct allows, later than the men defending against him believed possible, then judged a gap the width of a car, got it stopped, and got it rotated. Television directors learned the habit of cutting to his car whenever a gap opened anywhere ahead of it. In Baku, in 2017, he came from 10th on the grid to win the race outright. In fact, across 8 career victories, he never once won from pole position at the start, never from anywhere higher than 4th on the grid. Every single win was a hunt. Hold on to that image, because the same nerve that let him throw a car into a gap that did not quite exist would one day be aimed at his own career. The tragedy is already there if you know where to look. But to understand what Formula One saw in him and what the sport later took from him, you have to go to Monaco. Monaco, the 29th of May, 2016. Ricciardo takes pole position on Saturday, controls the race on Sunday, and the win is his. Then the team calls him in for tires, and the tires are not there. They are buried at the back of Red Bull's cramped Monte Carlo garage. He stands motionless in the pit box while the seconds bleed away, rejoins alongside Lewis Hamilton, and loses the race in the space of a pit exit. On the slowdown lap, his engineer begins to apologize, and Ricciardo cuts him off with one transmission. Nothing you could say would make that any better, he says. Save it. He would later admit the day haunted him for 2 years, and that what he felt was just pure rage. Shanghai, April of 2018. 6th on the grid, a late safety car, one set of fresh tires, and a decision. In 9 laps, Daniel Ricciardo goes from 6th to the lead of the Chinese Grand Prix, picking off car after car in the braking zones, and wins. Asked afterward by Martin Brundle, The former Grand Prix driver holding the microphone, how a man commits to moves like that. Ricciardo delivers the sentence that became his epitaph as a racer. Sometimes you just have to lick the stamp and send it. And then, Monaco again, the 27th of May, 2018, pole position, and 18 laps in, the hybrid unit fails. 25% of the engine's power, roughly 160 horsepower, gone. 2.5 seconds a lap gone. The rear brakes edge toward fire, 2 of the 8 gears become unusable, and behind him sits the healthy Ferrari of Sebastian Vettel, a 4-time world champion with nothing to lose. For more than 60 laps, Ricciardo defends Monaco's narrow streets in a broken car and does not make one single mistake. His team boss, Christian Horner, watched the data and called it unbelievable, said he managed it like he was on a Sunday afternoon drive. 2 years after the garage in Monte Carlo broke his heart, the same pit lane watched his redemption. It was the greatest weekend of his life, and 10 weeks later he walked away from the team. Here is the part of the story that does not fit. Drivers do not leave Red Bull at the peak of their powers. The grid queues for that seat. To understand it, you have to look at the other side of the garage, where a teenager named Max Verstappen was rewriting the team's future. By 2018, the operation's center of gravity was sliding, visibly, toward the younger man. According to later reporting, before that Monaco weekend, Helmut Marko, the Austrian who ran Red Bull's driver program, told Ricciardo's agent the plan out loud. Win the title with Daniel in 2018, then win it with Max in 2019 and 2020. A plan with an expiry date written into it. Christian Horner, the team principal who had signed him, admitted it years later. He suddenly felt that, hang on, I do not want to be the support act here, Horner said. I could tell he was starting to think of being a bigger fish in a smaller pond. On the 3rd of August 2018, the announcement landed and the paddock refused to believe it. Ricciardo was leaving the team that had given him every win of his career for Renault, a factory project years away from a podium, let alone a title. It was probably one of the most difficult decisions of my career so far, he said. But I thought that it was time for me to take on a fresh and new challenge. It sounded like a career move. It was not. It was a wager, the largest late-breaking move he ever attempted, with his own future as the corner. And for the first time in his life, the gap closed before he got there. The Renault years were purgatory, dressed as a project. 9th in the championship, then 5th, 2 podiums, and no path to the front. So for 2021, he moved again to McLaren, and for one Sunday in September, the old story came roaring back. Monza. Ricciardo seizes the lead into the first corner, controls the entire Grand Prix, sets the fastest lap on the final lap, and hands McLaren its first victory in 9 years. Then he presses the radio button. Deep down I knew this would come, so thanks for having my back, he says. And for anyone who thought I had left, I never left. Just moved aside for a while. It sounded like a comeback. It was a eulogy, and nobody knew it yet. He admitted later that the message was aimed inward as much as outward. There were times, he said, when he lost a bit of faith and second-guessed himself. A Grand Prix winner, reassuring himself out loud. The rest of the story was already written in numbers. That same season, 115 points for Ricciardo, 160 for his young teammate Lando Norris. The next year, the bottom fell out, 37 points to Norris's 122. The car was the assassin. Ricciardo himself called it peculiar. A machine that demanded understeer and punished the very thing his career was built on. Total confidence in the front axle, deep into the braking zone. His weapon did not merely go blunt. The car confiscated it. And the harder he analyzed the problem, the further he drifted from the instincts that had made him. In August of 2022, with a year still left on his contract, McLaren paid him to leave. The cost was not only professional. On Formula One's own podcast, Ricciardo later drew the line himself, carefully. He did not want to go too far and say, yeah, I was depressed, but he certainly was not always eating as much. And he was honestly just not his happy self. The sport's most famous smile, and behind it, a man who had stopped eating properly. In 2023 came the fairy tale attempt, back to Red Bull as reserve, back in love with racing, his words. This for me would be like the fairy tale, he said, to finish my career here. 10 races on the bench, a mid-season recall to the junior team, and then 2 race weekends in, a practice crash at Zandvoort, a broken bone in his left hand, surgery, 5 races on the sidelines. The substitute who climbed into his car was a young New Zealander named Liam Lawson, remember the name. By the autumn of 2024, the sport had made its decision. The men he raced against had made a different one. There is a particular kind of respect that Formula One reserves for the drivers other drivers feared, and in Ricciardo's final week, it came pouring out. Christian Horner, his team principal for a decade, one of the best overtakers in the business, a man whose judgment was impeccable, judging a gap, getting the car stopped, getting it rotated. That is not the language of farewell tributes. That is a scouting report. Zak Brown, the executive who had ended his McLaren contract early, still baffled that the partnership failed at all. Max Verstappen, the teammate whose rise had bent the entire arc of this story, was, by Ricciardo's own account, the only driver who texted him after Japan to tell him to keep his head up, that he deserved to be on the grid. Champions do not send that message out of pity. And in Singapore, Verstappen said the rest plainly. He is a great guy. Honestly, we always had a great relationship. He will be remembered as a great driver and as a great person also. Then there was Ricciardo's own verdict, delivered in the television pen, while he fought to keep his voice from breaking. I am proud of the career, he said. I tried to become world champion. I tried to become the best at something in the world. Consider the weight of that statement. Not the most famous, not the best paid, the best at something in the world. By the testimony of the men who beat him, employed him, and replaced him at one specific act, the overtake under braking, he may briefly have been exactly that. Which brings the story back to Singapore and to the strangest final lap in the sport's recent memory. Lap 45. Ricciardo is 18th, a lap down, invisible. His team calls him in for fresh soft tires. There is nothing left for him to gain, but there is something for someone else to lose. The fastest lap carries a championship point, and it belongs to the race leader Lando Norris, Max Verstappen's only rival for the title. On the final lap of his final Grand Prix, Daniel Ricciardo takes it away. The team called it a gift, a chance to go out with the fastest lap. Zak Brown of McLaren called it a nice A-team, B-team sporting thing that he did not think was allowed. Ricciardo, an hour removed from tears, grinned and said he was kind of hoping Max would now win by 1 point. Sorry, Lando. 6 years earlier, he had walked out on Red Bull because he refused to be the support act. The last thing he ever did in a Formula 1 car was run support for Red Bull. That is what really happened to Daniel Ricciardo. Not a mystery and not a collapse. Formula 1's coldest law is that the car decides which driver you are allowed to be. And twice, at full speed, he bet everything on the idea that he could outbreak that law. He licked the stamp. He sent it. And this time, the gap closed. If stories like this deserve more than a 4-day news cycle, subscribe and follow. The next legend is already waiting on the grid. Then leave a comment with your verdict. Should Daniel Ricciardo have stayed at Red Bull, or was leaving the bravest overtake he ever attempted? And the next time somebody brakes impossibly late on a Sunday afternoon and somehow makes the corner, look closely at that gap. Somewhere inside it, there is still a little of Daniel Ricciardo.